Hello and welcome. You're watching To The Point. Does yesterday's good news on the industrial production and inflation fronts suggest the economy has turned a corner? Or is that a premature judgment? At a time when many believe the government is not boldly pursuing reform, we ask, what is the health of the economy? And is enough being done to take India back to 8% growth? That's the debate in part 2. But first, a call by the chairperson of the National Commission for Women to legalize prostitution has created a debate whether that's the right step to take. Many say that decriminalization would be a better response. So in part 1, we ask, what does India need to do to improve the lives of millions of sex workers? And is the BJP government of a mind to do so? Joining me to discuss whether legalization or decriminalization is the right solution for the plight of sex workers is the chairperson of the National Commission for Women, Lalitha Kumaramangalam, former Attorney General Soli Sorabji, the well-known Supreme Court lawyer Vrinda Grover, and the General Secretary of the National Federation of Indian Women, Annie Raja. Soli Sorabji, let me start by asking you, as a leading lawyer, what is the present status of prostitution or sex work in the eyes of the law? Am I right in saying that under the Immoral Traffic Prevention Act of 1956, prostitution is not illegal, but soliciting, brothel keeping, and living on the earnings of sex work are illegal?
Yes, it's exploitation for commercial gain and for commercial purposes. That's the gist of it. In other words, if someone indulges in adultery or has multiple sexual relations in a fashionable room, that is not prostitution. It's not for gain, commercial gain or commercial considerations. And besides, it should not be in a public place as the law stands. You can't solicit in a public place or some place near schools, hospitals, other things. But prostitution is made criminal if it's indulgent for the purpose of commercial gain, for commercial purpose, for gain, and it is in a public place.
Okay. Now, if I understand correctly, Vrinda Grover, the literature on the subject says that a single woman selling her body does not breach the law. In that case, what is wrong with the present law as it is? Why does it need to be changed?
Well, actually, what the law does is that what it prohibits results in de facto prohibition. If a woman who is a sex worker, if she cannot have a place where she is engaged in sex work with another, and there are other sex workers there, if she cannot solicit clients, actually what you are doing is that you are saying that this work cannot be carried out. So without actually making it illegal, for all practical purposes, there is a de facto prohibition, and it makes it, they come under the control of the police and others.
All right, I understand what you're saying, and I'm just repeating it so the audience understand. Although the law as it stands at the moment doesn't make prostitution illegal, because of all the ancillaries, if I can so call them, are illegal, it becomes impossible to effectively be a prostitute without breaching the law. Have I understood you correctly, Vrinda Grover?
Absolutely, absolutely.
In which case, Lalitha Kumaramangalam, you recently suggested in an interview to The Hindu, speaking as the new chairperson of the National Commission for Women, that prostitution ought to be legalized. Why do you believe legalization would be in the best interest of sex workers?
Karan, that evening when I was asked this question by another television channel, I made it very clear that I was not merely speaking as the chairperson of the National Commission of Women. I was also talking as somebody who had worked in this field for several years, in the field of HIV/AIDS prevention. And I made it very clear that I said that prostitution should be legalized in order to see that not only did these women lead lives of a little more freedom and with a little more dignity, but also to ensure that both the women and their clients could actually exchange whatever they did, in short, that is, they could practice their sex in better conditions, meaning especially with regard to health. Also, that these women could actually access the other government benefits that are being offered to every other woman, almost every other woman in this country. Also, the third reason was that they could then see that their children, if they so wanted that option, were able to live what is euphemistically called by most other people a better life. You see, the thing is that most of sex work or prostitution, whatever name you want to call it, goes on in extremely sort of sleazy circumstances, and I don't mean sleazy with referring to the act of it. I'm talking about the physical and the health conditions that prevail. Because most of it goes on underground, even in the red light areas in several of the big cities of this country, but especially also because there's a lot of sex work that goes on not in brothels but outside in places where the sale of sex itself becomes very unhealthy, both for the client and for the sex worker. This is the reference of or rather the context with which or in which I made my suggestion.
Now, Andy Raja, you've heard Lalita Kumaramangam explain that legalization would add to the dignity of the sex worker, it would improve the conditions in which she works, it would make her accessible to the benefits which she cannot at the moment claim but which are available to other workers. Prima facie, as she listed out the advantages of legalization, it seemed like a very convincing case. But I know that you actually believe legalization would be a retrograde step. You're against it. Explain to me, why do you think legalization would be retrograde?
First of all, women in a position to sell their body and have their livelihood is nothing but the failure of the system, and this is not a dignified life. This is what I feel, and by what all the reasons the chairperson was quoting, that can be achieved by making it decriminalize the prostitution. So it is not that can you ensure that by legalizing prostitution, all this dignity and what about the stigma? On the one hand, in our country, the moral policing and love jihad, all these things are very strong even today. And on the other hand, you are saying that legalizing prostitution.
I'll come to decriminalization in a moment's time. I want to try and understand why you think legalization is retrograde. Now, you explained to me earlier that one of the problems with legalization is that the government would be involved in regulating the profession. That would mean the giving of licenses, and you think that would be degrading for women. Explain why.
You see now which is the work area and what is the product. It is the women's body, and once legalizing means you are licensing the women and you are directing the women, you are putting conditions to women in a particular area you work, and your body should be used in particular zones, and you have actually your movement is stopped, and you are bringing in many other ills because more trafficking will be there.
I'm not sure about trafficking. That doesn't necessarily follow from legalization, so let's not bring that in because many dispute that. Let's stick to your first few points. So, Rabji, let me bring you in. Do you accept that legalization of prostitution will mean that automatically the government gets involved in regulating the profession? That in turn will mean government interference in the lives of sex workers, and possibly not just the granting of licenses so they can operate in a regulated fashion, but some form perhaps of a license permit Raj in this profession. Do you accept that that would be the downside of legalization?
Yes, I'm afraid that will be the downside. But because, look, let's get to the basic problem. Many women go into prostitution, many, not all, because of economic reasons, economic necessity. Now, where's the question of state legalizing it? First of all, it gives the impression that you permit prostitution, or you recognize the reality that some people have to do it. Now, by legalizing it, one thing you do is, apart from bringing in the state for purpose of seeing the conditions are well and the health is okay, it introduces that element of interference. And that means, again, police, license Raj, whatever you call it. And I'm on balance not in favor of it. I have no definite views on it, but on balance I'm not in favor of legalizing. Decriminalizing is different. We'll come to that.
Okay. Let me bring you in, Brinda Grover. You do passionately believe that decriminalization rather than legalization is the right response to improve the plight of, let's face it, perhaps tens and millions of sex workers in this country. Why is decriminalization preferable?
There are about 5 million sex workers in India today, and there is a national network of sex workers in India. What I am saying, I'm only echoing their argument, and this is borne out by their daily experience. They are seeking decriminalization because currently the objectives that the chairperson of NCW pointed out of improving the conditions of their life, of giving them access to health, of them being able to set the terms and conditions in which they will work, and according some dignity, will be served by decriminalization, and legalization will actually again disempower them. Let me explain this a bit. What is happening today is that because there are certain forms which we discussed earlier, which are prohibited under the Immoral Trafficking Prevention Act, therefore that gives control over by the police and by other people to the work that sex workers are doing.
Can I interrupt?
Sex workers are doing?
Can I interrupt?
Yes.
Can I ask you this? Why would legalization lead to de-empowering? That
Yes,
to most people sounds
because-
like you're contradicting yourself.
No, actually what it will do is that we will, the state, the government will give licenses. It will be that you are now authorized to practice sex work. Who will regulate whether you have a license or not? The police will be monitoring that. Is there a force more corrupt and criminal than the police in this country? No. Also, we need to realize, and this is an article in The Economist of early November, they have interviewed 2 women who are under the radar hidden sex workers. Their families do not know that they are practicing sex work to earn money. These are not women who are going to go out and get licenses. Those women are going to be exploited and will have to work under coercion of others.
Okay.
When you decriminalize the prohibitions, the sex workers, and we must remember this is adult consensual sexual services that are being provided. So let's remove morality from it.
Okay.
These sex workers can then decide which client they will have, what will be the terms they will say, how they will access health services for a range of reasons, not just for HIV. We are giving control over their lives to the women and not to the police or any other agent of the state.
Lalita Kumaramangalam, first let's address the problems that have been pointed out by Annie Raja, by Brinda Grover and Soli Surabji with the concept of legalization of sex work. They say that when the government steps in to regulate this sort of profession, it will set up zones where it's possible and not. It will give licenses to the women, which will then be monitored by the police. The women will then become subject to exploitation by rogue policemen, which, as you know, is pretty rife in India anyway. And the second problem is that there are many sex workers who are, as they say, under the radar. They won't step out and be legalized, and so they and their plight will not be taken care of. How do you therefore answer these concerns about legalization?
Yeah, Karan, the thing is that you must understand that in India, prohibition rarely ever works very successfully. And the fact also is that we must remember that almost, or not almost, every trade in India has got its terms and conditions by which they have to operate. Whether it's the media, whether it's lawyers, whether it's NGOs, whether it's anybody else, and whether it's doctors, etc. Now, the fact is that yes, I agree that the majority of sex workers, they are forced to sell sex because they don't have other options. But the women who want to remain in the trade or want to leave it, both have the right to do what they want. At the moment, because perhaps the act of sex is not, of sex work is not, may not be illegal, but the fact is the entire conditions in which they operate, that is the running of brothels, you can't sell sex in public places, etc., is criminal. Therefore, it really does happen under the radar. You already have something like zones, what they are talking about, that is the red light areas. For example, in Delhi, GB Road, in Bombay, Kamatipura, and several other cities, and Sonagachi in Calcutta. There are several places like this already. Now, if this is not decriminalized or legalized, eventually in the long run, it ends up being more or less the same. If it is not decriminalized, then all of it is actually going on under the radar.
Can I
and you can't actually mandate in what sort of conditions these women should sell sex.
Can I
whether
interrupt?
It's with regard to their
Ms.
health,
Kumaramangalam, let me
whether
interrupt.
it's with regard to if they
Permit
want
me-
to leave
permit
the
me an
trade and
interruption.
come out, and
Permit me an
whether they
interruption.
be given the benefit of government schemes.
Permit me an interruption at that point. Permit me an interruption. You've attempted to answer the concerns that were raised by Annie Raja and Brinda Grover about regulation,
The
government
concern that she
inspection.
also said was
Just a moment, please wait. You've attempted to answer the concerns raised by my two other guests about legalization, because those are concerns to do with government regulation, government inspection, government licenses, and how the police will exploit the situation. There is another concern with legalization that I want to put to you. Answer that as well. This time it's a moral problem rather than a practical problem. Should the state actually be involved in regulating prostitution? Soli Sorabji raised this issue a moment ago. It's one thing for prostitution or sex work not to be considered a criminal activity. It's quite another thing for the state to actually step in and actively regulate it and issue licenses for it. Would Indian society be prepared to go down the road of legalization?
I mean, by we I mean nobody is suggesting that. Nobody is saying we issue licenses, etc. What I mean is that if you decriminalize or legalize it, these women have the right to have or to access whatever they want to, whether it's finance, whether it's training, whether it's health services, etc. Today they don't have that. And I agree, there is a huge, massive moral.
I feel I need to interrupt you again.
Thing, which is about right versus wrong.
Ms. Kumaramangalam, I want to interrupt you again.
But that's the hypocritical part of this country.
Ms. Kumaramangalam, just a moment. I need to interrupt you again. Listen to me. I get the feeling, Ms. Kumaramangalam, that you're using the term legalization and decriminalization as synonymous. Is that what you're doing? Are you using them as synonymous terms?
In the long run, eventually, they end up being more or less the same. But if you want me to say that you don't want me to use the word legalization, I don't mind. But you have to at least decriminalize not just the commercial sex itself. But when you decriminalize it, you also decriminalize a lot of people who are currently responsible for much of the problem around trafficking of women and young girls.
I've understood you. I need to stop. Ms. Kumaramangalam, I want to stop you there because others disagree with what you're doing. People are in favor of decriminalization, not legalization. They don't believe you can use the two terms synonymously as you are. Let me come to them and I'll come back to you in a moment's time.
No.
Do you believe, and I'll come to you in a moment, sorry Sarabji, do you believe, Annie Raja, that the two are synonymous as Lalita Kumaramangalam is suggesting?
Not at all, not at all. Decriminalizing means don't consider these women as criminals, don't treat them as criminals. And why even now they are denying, the government is denying all the other schemes. She is repeatedly saying that the benefit of the schemes. Why on earth they are denied these schemes even today? So they don't come out and they were even refused to access health facility
stick to this. You therefore believe these are not synonymous terms?
It is not synonymous at all. These are 2 issues.
Sorry Sarabji, do you accept that the two are synonymous? That decriminalization and legalization amount to the same thing?
Not at all, Karan. Decriminalization means don't prosecute them, send them to jail for the activity they are doing for economic reasons. Legalization is entirely different. I want to ask a question, if I may, to our respectful lady. Would she approve of state-run brothels?
Ms. Kumaramangalam, do you want to answer that?
I'm sorry, I really can't hear you, sir. My audio is very, very bad today. I'm really sorry.
Soli Sorabji,
but nothing's been done.
Soli Sorabji disagrees with your belief that decriminalization and legalization are synonymous and can be used as alternates for the same thing. And he therefore asks, would you accept the concept of state-run brothels? Because he believes that's a corollary to legalization.
No. I mean, I think that's stretching it a bit too far. Nobody is saying the state is going to run brothels. Basically, what sex workers today demand is that they not be treated as criminal, because under the current ITPA, it's not the traffickers, that is the pimps and the brokers, etc., who are normally supposed to do most of the trafficking.
Can I interrupt you again? Ms. Kumaramangalam, it's emerging that actually there's no substantial difference between you and the other three. The difference is because you're confusing or insisting upon treating as synonymous two concepts that they believe are different. They believe decriminalization is separate to legalization. You're using the word synonymously. But if you don't use them synonymously and stick to...
That's because, Karan, they fear that when I mean decriminalization, legalization, I'm going to give legal power to the people who do trafficking of girls and women, who force them into sex work.
No, they don't mean that at all. Let me bring in Brinda Grover.
About sex work,
no, they don't mean that. I'm sorry.
Karan,
No,
they don't mean that. I'll take 10 seconds if you allow me to say.
No, they don't mean that.
When I talk about sex work, I talk about adult consensual sex work. And trafficking and sex work are looked at in totally two different...
No one is confusing prostitution with trafficking, and these three are not doing that either. Let me bring in Brinda Grover to clarify. Brinda Grover, I want you to clarify for me what you believe is the distinction between decriminalization and legalization. I know I've asked you that before, but we need to go back to it, because Ms. Kumara Mangalam treats them as synonymous terms and believes that the two are the same. You don't believe they're the same. So please clarify it again.
Because the regime that will then come in place will be totally different, and I think it's that formal regime that we are looking at. I think Ms. Kumara Mangalam and I share the same concerns here, but it's how will we actually implement it. When we say decriminalize, as she said, the conditions that are hampering and hindering their work and pushing them underground, which are presently codified in the Immoral Traffic Prevention Act, those are to be repealed. That law is to be amended, and those are to be repealed, which will therefore not allow anybody to prosecute the women or somebody who rents a place or brothel. That would be the decriminalization by making amendments of repealing in the IPA. The other part of legalization requires a new state regulation to come into being. There will be an authority which the government will then say, you monitor, you regulate, this is the system by which we will allow. That will actually go counterproductive and again create a fresh set of agencies which will both control and coerce women. To meet the objectives that the chairperson has laid out, decriminalization will meet that end. It has nothing to do with trafficking. In fact, those who can assist in trafficking are the
I take your point. Let's not get into trafficking. I want to go back to Ms. Kumara Mangalam. Ms. Kumara Mangalam, the first thing I want to point out, because I'm not sure.
I'm just saying to you again what I said a little while before.
No, don't repeat yourself.
My audio is really bad.
I will repeat for you what they said for that very reason. The key point is that people like Brinda Grover and Soli Sorabji and Annie Raja do not believe that legalization and decriminalization are the same. They've pointed out at great length the difference in the two concepts. However, they're all saying that your intention and your... Let me finish. They're all saying that your intention is not just noble, they agree with what you want to do, which is to improve the plight of sex workers. Can you not therefore stop using the word legalization and instead call what you want to do decriminalization, because then they'll all be with you?
Karan, I can't talk about the law, ITP, etc., because that is now sub judice, and I'm part of the expert committee, so it's not correct for me to go on and talk about detail about whatever changes are recommended, will be recommended for the ITPA. But that's against the case.
Concepts are different.
No, you're missing the point, Ms. Kumara Mangalam. Ms. Kumara Mangalam, you're missing the point. I'm not asking you to talk about the law. I'm asking you to choose. I'm asking you to correct the terminology you're using. Ms. Kumara Mangalam, listen to me. I'm asking you to correct the terminology you're using.
I have had endless arguments with lawyers, with activists, for people who don't want and want versus want this. And ultimately, I have found that decriminalization will more or less end up as legalization of sex work. What do you mean by decriminalize? That you prevent these women from coming under the ambit of the Criminal Procedure Code of the Indian Penal Code, right?
No,
so basically you're saying that
I'm running. Look, please let me interrupt you, because
as of now, sex work per se is not illegal.
Ms. Kumara Mangalam, I'm sorry, you're mistaken when you believe that decriminalization and legalization amount to the same thing. These three have pointed out in great detail they don't. However, your intention is shared with them. And therefore, what they're saying to you is, stop confusing two concepts that are different by treating them as the same. Call what you want to do decriminalization, and everyone will support you.
But I'm afraid that I have worked in this field for so long now, and I've spoken to so many sex workers themselves, that I think perhaps, there is some gap in communication here.
All right, we've reached a very interesting point as we come to the end of this discussion. All four of my guests want to achieve the same thing. They have the same target, which is to improve the plight of millions of sex workers. Unfortunately, the concept that they use for what they want to do is different. And one of my guests, the chairperson, doesn't recognize that the two are different concepts. The others insist they're different concepts. But they're all talking essentially about decriminalizing. Lalita Kumaramangalam, however, insists that's the same as legalizing. The others say it's not. Legalizing has a lot else going with it, which they are worried and concerned about and which they don't want to happen. But the intention is common and shared. Let's hope they'll correct that confusion or difference over terminology and actually act together in concert and attend to the real problem, which is the plight of sex workers. My thanks to all four of my guests for an enlightening conversation, but also one that at the end of the day was a little confusing because of that confusion of terminology. Time.